A very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all to the ICANN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. So today we will be discussing today's and yesterday's newspaper, that is Thursday and Friday's newspaper. We have a lots to cover today, so let's start. The first topic is about terrorism or India-Pakistan relations. It is a part of your GS2 or GS3 syllabus. If it is based on terrorism, then it's GS3, or if it is India-Pakistan, it is GS2. So this is a small example that you can quote when you are writing anything about terrorism and what is the progress that has been made in tackling the menace of terrorism. Or if you're talking in general about the India-Pakistan relations, then this is an example that you can quote, which is a good development and as far as the India-Pakistan relations are concerned. So here the Jamaat-ud-Dawa chief, who is Hafiz Saeed, who has been the mastermind behind the Mumbai terror attacks, has now been put under jail for a period of 10 years. So he was facing 2 cases related to the terror financing. So based on that, he is also a United Nations designated terrorist. So he has now been put behind the bars for a period of 10 years. He has been sentenced to jail with a term of 10 years. So this can be quoted when you're talking about India-Pakistan relations, about what measures Pakistan has taken to regarding the issue of terrorism, which India keeps on repeatedly at various platforms and at various fora. It keeps on raising the issue of terrorism from that is emanating from Pakistan. So in such cases, this example can be quoted. Now let's move on to the this whole article was about the free trade agreements and its analysis. And the reason why this article is there is because the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is a 15-member grouping that comprises of nearly 30% of the global GDP and 1/3 of the global population, has now been completed, and the countries have struck this deal of RCEP, and India has kept itself away from RCEP, citing reasons that it will widen the already bad trade deficit that India has with many of the RCEP countries, and also it is going to open the floodgates to very cheap imports from these RCEP countries, which is going to hurt the domestic manufacturing. Also, India has a lot of concerns about China, with whom we already have border tensions escalated. So it is kind of India is very apprehensive about any economic relations with China, because we are talking about an economic decoupling from China. So these are the arguments that India has given for keeping itself away from RCEP. This whole article is basically an analysis which tells how such free trade agreements are actually very important for India. So it begins by stating the importance of the free trade agreements. First is that these FTAs act as a gateway to the international trade. Now we are in an era where the role of the World Trade Organization has also now diminished because of the formation of several such regional groupings and free trade agreements. So WTO has also not been able to play that role at the global level, where the free trade across the globe is encouraged. So various countries have now started to look inwards, and protectionist tendencies have started to emerge. So that kind of points out to the failure of the World Trade Organization. In such a case, these free trade agreements offer a gateway to the international trade. So that is why they are very important. The second thing is, these will help any country which has FTAs with several other countries to integrate its supply chain and be a part of the global supply chain. So when a country becomes a part of the global supply chain, it will get access to the global market, where its own exports can be sold in the international market. And also, whenever a country is part of a global supply chain, it will also start receiving a lot of investments from various other countries. So this is another advantage of the free trade agreements. So this can be best exemplified by the success stories of several East Asian nations. These East Asian countries have had free trade agreements with many of the other countries like Europe and USA. The other day we were talking about the lessons that we can learn from Vietnam, Thailand and Bangladesh as far as manufacturing is concerned. So how these countries follow an open trade policy, and how they have been able to strike FTAs with Europe, where the imports from these countries are they don't have any import duties there. So that is why these the products from these countries become extremely competitive and cheap at the international market. So therefore that will it will lead to a lot of exports from these countries. So this success story of the East Asian nations can be quoted as an example of how having a country having free trade agreements with many countries will be able to access the trade channels of to all these countries, and it will be able to export more to the international market, and also it will be able to receive a lot of investments from many of these countries. So after citing the importance of the free trade agreements, this article also tries to identify some of the issues which are associated when India and the FTAs are concerned. The first is the India's apprehensions about the free trade agreements. The argument that with those countries with which India already has free trade agreements, India has a very huge trade deficits with these countries. So being a part of RCP kind of an arrangement is going to further widen this trade deficits that India has with the other countries. So India does not want this to happen. So the trade deficits and the apprehension that India has with these FTAs is one issue that this article is pointing out. The second issue is, this issue says that India has not actually, first of all, opened up to the entire world, or India has not actually too much liberalized its economy to talk of now limiting it. So this particular point is saying that according to this import tariffs in India, the most favored nation import tariffs that India is levying on the imports from these countries is 13.8%, and this is considered to be one of the highest for any major economy like India. So India's import tariffs are already high. Even the UNCTAD, that is a United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, is also saying that according to Import Restrictiveness Index, India is put under the category of very restrictive. So which means India has not even put down its barriers to trade from other countries. So it cannot even say that free trade agreements are hurting the Indian economy, because Indian economy has always put up those barriers with respect to the international trade, even in respect of dumping. Between 1995 and 2009, nearly 972 times the anti-dumping measures have been initiated or invoked by India. So this again was done in order to protect the baby domestic manufacturing industries, to that those industries needed to be protected, and that is why these anti-dumping measures were also invoked nearly 972 times between 1995 and 09. So this means that India has not actually liberalized its economy to a large extent, and therefore it does not actually can talk about how free trade agreements can be helpful or hurtful. The third thing this article is talking about is the domestic industry. Now India is giving an argument that it is because of these free trade agreements that we are getting a lot of cheap imports into India, and the floodgates have been opened. A lot of cheap imports from these East Asian countries and China are flooding India, and thereby hurting the Indian domestic industry. But the fact of the matter is that Indian domestic industry is also not extremely competitive at the global level. So we cannot just say that Indian domestic industries are not able to export much into the international market because of the flaws of the FTAs, because we also have to think about the flaws of our own domestic industries, because of which we are not able to export much. So we cannot just blame everything on the free trade agreements, that our domestic industry is not performing well because of the free trade agreements. So free trade agreements cannot be blamed for everything. We also have to look at the competitiveness of the Indian domestic industry, and we have to look at how this competitiveness can be improved of the domestic industry, rather than just putting the blame on FTAs. So these are the various reasons or the issues that this article is talking about, that why we should actually open up and be a part of the global supply chain through these agreements like the RCP. So they offer us a gateway to the international market. They will help us integrate with the global supply chains, and they will bring in a lot of investment into India, and India can also be exporting a lot more into the international market. So that is how this article is saying as a whole, that India has to further open up, because India has always been very protective, be it in terms of the tariff that India is imposing, or how it is considering that FTAs are actually responsible for the poor performance of domestic industry. So but it is not the case. So we have to be more open to these free trade agreements, and we have to properly analyze how much helpful they will be to the Indian economy. Yeah, the fourth reason is also the globalization. So Arvind Panagaria, who is a very well-known economist, he says that India has actually benefited from more free trade and more liberalization. So poverty, for instance, in 2004-5, it was nearly 40% of the population of India were poor. But by 2011-12, it came down to nearly 20% of the population of India being poor. And this was also the era when the average economic growth was at nearly 8% in the Indian economy. So this was an era where we had followed the principles of LPG liberalization, globalization and privatization. So what Arvind Panagaria is trying to say here is that liberalization has actually helped India to clock a very good economic growth rate of 8%, to drastically to at least very well control and reduce the poverty rate in India. So therefore liberalization as a principle is going to help the Indian economy, and that is also another reason why we should be more open to these free trade agreements. Now let's move on to the next topic. Now this topic is about the investment issue or the healthcare issue. Based on which one it is a part of your GS3 or GS2 syllabus. So this is a small topic which is saying that the 15th Finance Commission, that is headed by N.K. Singh. So the 15th Finance Commission has recommended that in order to plug the deficit in the healthcare infrastructure in India, there is a need for more public-private partnerships. So there is a lot of loopholes or gaps in when it comes to the healthcare infrastructure in India. It is very skewed in favor of the urban areas but very poor in the rural areas. So this is where the public-private partnerships in the health infrastructure need to be improved, is what the 15th Finance Commission headed by N.K. Singh is telling. So it is saying that at the block level or at the more decentralized level, at the grassroots, the public sector, that is the government, should take care of all the primary healthcare needs of the people, and at the more higher levels where the private sector has to step in. So the private sector has to offer the more expensive specialized care, where the public sector, the government, will have to step in to offer the more primary and preventive care at the grassroots level. So this way, both the public and the private sector will have to contribute together if we have to set right our health infrastructure. So whenever you're writing about any healthcare issue, you can definitely make a mention of the N.K. Singh 15th Finance Commission, and then say how the committee has also said that public-private partnership is a good thing in the healthcare sector. So do make a mention about the 15th Finance Commission of N.K. Singh about PPP in health infrastructure. Now let's move on to the next topic. This topic is about the East Asia Summit, and definitely it's a part of your GS2 syllabus under international relations. So East Asia Summit once again is a summit that in which India is also a part of it, and India also took part in the recent summit that happened. And it again brings focus on the Indo-Pacific region. So a lot of focus in the recent days has been made on the Indo-Pacific region, be it the Quad or be it the Malabar exercise. So the countries are giving a lot of importance to the Indo-Pacific region to counter China in that region. So that is why Indo-Pacific as a region is extremely important, and East Asia Summit also has an influence upon this Indo-Pacific region because the member countries belong to the same region. So the reason we are talking about the East Asia Summit that recently happened is because the summit happened recently virtually, and India also took part in the summit. But however, this whole article discusses various issues related to our commitments to East Asia Summit as such, and what has been India's role, what will be India's role in the future, or what can be India's role in the future. So first of all, it talks about several issues. One is the commitments. So India is Recently, as I said, the summit was held virtually, and our prime minister was held up with a lot of commitments domestically. So, therefore, the prime minister should have actually attended the meeting virtually. But, however, because of various commitments, it was the external affairs minister S. Jaishankar who attended the meeting. So, like that, there have been several instances where we should have been a more integral part of the discussions that are happening in the summit, but we have not been able to show so much of commitment. This is the first issue. The second is the Chinese threat. So East Asia again is very much dominated by the Chinese dominance in that region. So even in this particular East Asia summit also, the countries hardly talk about the China and the various issues associated with these countries and what issues they have with China. Now, for instance, in the whole East Asian region, there are several countries which have a lot of disputes and issues with China. But whenever the East Asia summit happens, these countries hardly talk about the issues that they have with China. So this is the kind of dominance that China is enjoying in this region, and because of which the real issues are not even getting discussed. The third issue is the progress made. So because of all this, the progress that is being made when the countries take part in the summit has also not been very encouraging, to say so. So in the 10th anniversary of the East Asia Summit that happened in 2015 at Kuala Lumpur, in that time also a lot of progress over what has been done so far, done till that far, could not be made. So even now in 2020, the 15th anniversary happened where the Hanoi Declaration was formulated, but still this entire Hanoi Declaration, which was completely about the 15th anniversary and all the discussions that took place, it had only 12 paragraphs. So this shows the amount of discussions that are going on and the agenda that these countries are setting up for the meeting, and also the progress that they have made and what they intend to do in the future. So everything was just put together in a matter of 12 paragraphs, which doesn't properly summarize the intention of the summit, and also the to build upon the previously achieved targets or build upon the progress that has been made thus far. So this shows that the progress that the summit is making whenever it is meeting has also not been very encouraging. So then we come to what has been India's role, or what will be the role of India in the future. The first is the maritime sphere. Maritime sphere is one area where India has always and will continue to show more interest. In fact, now the shift has been there in India's point of view from the continental to the maritime sphere. So now India is giving more importance to the maritime sphere, in which it is mainly concerned about the maritime security. So because the maritime sphere has been one such sphere which has been very important for ensuring the freedom of navigation and the free sea lanes of communication. A lot of trade and commerce passes through the region. So that is why the security in these maritime areas is very important for India. So in the future also, India will definitely be concerned about the security in the maritime sphere. The next is a financial stability. At a time when the financial stability has become very the financial issues or the stability has become very volatile and dynamic across the world, it's very important to ensure the financial stability for these countries and for India also. So that is why this is one more issue what India is going to be concerned about in the future. The third is the sustainability. So sustainability is again one more thing, because we are in the midst of the climate change, where even India has been very much concerned about the issue of illegal fishing in these maritime sphere, about the issue of climate change and the kind of impact that it is having on the resources in the maritime sphere. So all of these have been India's concerns and are going to be so in the future. It is being concerned about the sustainability of the ecosystem in the region. Next is the labor mobility. So India has a very good advantage in terms of having skilled labor. And India has always proposed that the labor mobility has to be more liberalized, so that India's highly skilled labor can move to other countries in the East Asian region and can meet the demand for the skilled labor in those countries. So India has always pushed for more labor mobility among these countries in the East Asian region. Next is the services. So India's labor is very much skilled in the services. So service trade of India, particularly the information technology and services, so that has been a very good potential point for India, where India has a lot of advantage in that. So India has been pushing for more liberalization of trade in services with these East Asian countries, and India will continue to do so that in the future as well. Next issue is the epidemics. So now that we have seen this wave of epidemic of COVID-19 that's happening, and also India is the pharmacy of the world. Clinical trials are now going on, and India is the largest producer of the generic drugs. Pharmaceutical hubs are there in India. So therefore, India can likely play in the future a very important role in these countries in the East Asian region by helping set up pharmaceutical units and hubs and exchanging the knowledge related to the vaccines, or how to manage the medicine, the infrastructure, everything. So in all this, India can play a very important role in the future. And the last thing is the humanitarian assistance and disaster relief activities. So this is also another area where India has been very much active and will continue to do so in the future. So maritime sphere, now the maritime regions have started to see that there is warming of the ocean surface, and therefore the occurrence of, or the frequency of occurrence of these disasters has also increased. So India is very much a part of conducting these humanitarian assistance and disaster relief activities in the region. So these are all what India's role is going to be in the future. So that is it about the East Asia Summit. What are all the issues that this as a summit, as a grouping, is facing, and then what will be India's role in this region, in the East Asian region, in the future. Now let's move on to the next topic. Now this topic is about the role of women or police reforms, which will again be a part of your GS2 syllabus. So this is a small article which was about Seema Dhaka, who is a I think she's a constable. Seema Dhaka is a constable in Delhi, and she had rescued 76 children in the last 2 months. So because of which now the Delhi Police Commissioner has decided that she is going to get out of turn promotion. So this example can be used, one, to show whenever you're talking about police reforms, one recommendation that various committees, including the National Police Commission under Dharamveera, has always been talking about is the increasing the representation of women in the police force. So this has been one constant suggestion that has been made. So in this case, it shows how women, even though she is a constable, it shows how women can also be a very powerful contributing factor in the police force. So this example you can give whenever you're talking about police reforms. In fact, there is already a scheme which says that if you make an outstanding contribution, you will be getting out of turn promotion. But she is the first person who have gotten the out of turn promotion, and that too she's a woman. So this, you can use it when you're talking about police reforms, and also when you're talking about the role of women. You can even use it in your essays that women are they perform, and it is on the basis of merit that they sustain in the economy, they sustain in their jobs. So you can give the example and show how women can also do wonderful work, and they are very competitive and meritorious. So this example can be used in such instances as well. So now we move on to the next topic. This again is a small topic, which is a gender related issue, again as a part of GS1 or 2 syllabus. So this topic, it's just talking about the paternity leave, and because Virat Kohli has apparently spoken about it and he wants to take paternity leave and he has applied for the same. So this from this entire article, one good example that stands out is the example of Zomato. So Zomato has an approved policy where it says that 26 weeks of paternity leave will be given to all the new fathers. So this is a very important policy that, and not just Zomato, some of the other corporate sector companies are also following. So this example of Zomato can be written to show the importance of paternity leave and how some of these companies are already implementing it. So we had the Maternity Benefits Act and a detailed analysis about the same. So one important thing that missed out was on the paternity leave. So paternity leave again is very important and is very common in the European countries, particularly the Scandinavian countries. It is very common where the men also get as much as the paternity leave as a woman does, because caring for a child is a responsibility of both the father and the mother, and is not the sole responsibility of the mother. And the child also needs the care of both the parents and not just the mother. So this is a very important issue, and you may have a direct question on that about the Maternity Benefits Act and its analysis probably, in which you will definitely be mentioning about the lack of importance given to the paternity leave. In such case, you can quote the example of Zomato and say that it has an approved policy of giving 26 weeks leave of paternity leave for new fathers. So that is about this topic. Now we move on to the next one. This topic is about water governance and is a part of your GS2 syllabus. This whole article is saying that whenever we talk of the subject of water, so water, India is a country that is blessed with a lot of rivers, and these rivers span across states. So whenever we talk of water governance, it has to be a collaborative approach between the states on the one hand and the center. So this requires a federal water governance mechanism where the water governance happens with the collaboration of a joint effort of both the center and the states. So in this regard, the center had introduced 2 bills in the recent monsoon session. However, it could not be discussed and passed. The one bill was Interstate River Water Dispute Amendment Bill 2019 and the Dam Safety Bill 2019. The Interstate River Water Dispute Bill Amendment Bill is talking about 2 main important things. One is to now set up a permanent tribunal. Now you must be aware that we have several river disputes that are happening, and there are different tribunals for different river disputes. There's a Krishna tribunal, there's a Kaveri dispute tribunal, so like that there is a Mahanadi tribunal that is different, and Ravi Bias is separate. So like that it is very separate, and therefore this amendment wants to create one permanent tribunal that is going to exist as an institution, as a body, and therefore that is going to bring a kind of consistency among the orders of various that are involving similar issues across various river basins. The second is, it is also talking about dispute resolution committee. So this committee is very important because this committee is talking about mediation, where both the states who are on dispute will be given a chance that through mediation, through informal means, they can somehow sort out the issue themselves. So if this mediation doesn't work out, only then they are going to the tribunal. So this saves a lot of time as well, and prevents unnecessary litigation, and it also helps in consensus building and coming out with an integrated approach whereby both the states are compromising a little bit, but however the interests of both the states are served. So there is not a win-lose situation, but there is a win-win situation. So that is the idea behind forming the dispute resolution committee. And the second bill is about the dam safety bill, which is talking about setting up of authorities of dam safety at the center and the state level to take a stock of the aging dams in India and to ensure that they are safe. So this is about these 2 bills. So this whole article is again then it goes on to discuss why this water governance or a federal mechanism for water governance is important in a country like India. So before that, we must understand that this is actually an example which makes it clear that we actually require such a collaborative management or a collaborative arrangement for the management of water. So recently the center has launched a centrally sponsored scheme by the name of Jal Jeevan Mission. So this Jal Jeevan Mission mainly aims to provide universal access to safe drinking water to all the people. But we must realize that drinking water and sanitation is something under the purview of the states. So it comes under the state list. But still, it is a center which has launched the centrally sponsored scheme of Jal Jeevan Mission, and under this, the center is giving financial assistance to the states as well. So this shows that on a topic that is actually under the purview of the states, the center has launched a scheme. So this and is also providing finances to the states. So this is a classic example of why both the center and the states should combine their efforts together and make a joint effort and to have federal water governance and a coordinated approach. So this example can be used to show the importance of a federal water management. Next, we will see why is it important for a country like India to have federal water governance where both the center and the states are collaborating. The first issue is that there have been a lot of emerging concerns, and these concerns are so complex and so challenging that it is not possible for just the states or the center to handle alone. So it requires a coordinated approach where the center and the states are collaborating with each other and helping each other. So water security is one such concern which is there because the population is definitely growing and the demand for water is growing. But there are several cities in India, including a city like Shimla or even Bangalore, they are facing excessive water security issues. So there is water shortage because of the pollution, because of growing population and the increasing demand. So this is another issue which both the center and the states will together have to address. Next is also the sustainability, and this is particularly because of the fact that climate change is now there amongst us, and because of climate change the water availability is also decreasing. It is playing it is also creating havoc with the monsoon patterns also. So because of all this, sustainability of water has definitely become an issue, and in the future the availability of water is going to decline. So these emerging issues are so challenging and diverse that it requires the collaboration of both the center and the states. The next issue is the pollution. So rivers span across the states, and these rivers are also interlinked. So pollution in one stream is going to pollute the water in the other stream as well. So pollution in one river which connects to another is again going to pollute the other river as well. And this other river could as well be in another state. So that is why it requires the collaboration of both the center and the state. The next reason why we require collaborative approaches in navigation. Now we know how inland waterways is a very eco-friendly way of navigation. So therefore government is also developing various inland waterways or the national inland waterways, so to enable inland navigation, which is not just eco-friendly but is also much more economical compared to the other means of transport. So in order to encourage this also, we require states to collaborate among one another, and also for the states on the one hand to collaborate with the center. Next is the interbasin transfer. So in India, there are several basins which are surplus and there are several basins which are deficit. So we require that the water from the surplus basin be transferred to a deficit basin, so that the surplus basin don't face the problem of floods and the deficit basin don't face the problem of drought. So this way the water availability can be ensured in the deficit basins, and surplus water in the surplus basins could also be managed well. So for this, these interbasin transfers are proposed, and again these interbasin transfers are they may span across states, and it requires the cooperation of all the states with the center. So these are the various reasons why we require a federal water governance system or a model in place where the center and the states can cooperate. Even Australia is doing the same, the example of which you can quote in your answers. So it is making investments under the National Water Act of 2007. These investments are made by the central government in the various provinces or in the various states, and for this the Murray-Darling Agreement has been signed, where the center is going to push out finances to the states, and the states are going to implement it in cooperation with the center. So even you can give the example of Australia's agreement, and you can show how there have been various other countries across the world where this kind of federal water governance mechanism is in place, and that is a way to go about it. So this is about the issue of federal water governance and the requirement or the need for the center and the states to work together to manage or to govern water in India. Now we move on to the next topic. Now this topic is about the banking sector issues. So the banking sector, what ails the banking sector in India and what reforms must be taken up, they are all a part of your economy portion in your GS syllabus 3. So this whole article is talking about the recent instance of amalgamation of DBS with Lakshmi Vilas Bank. So Lakshmi Vilas Bank was failing and its NPAs had risen. So RBI had proposed the merger or amalgamation of the DBS and Lakshmi Vilas Bank. And whenever the RBI had approved for such an amalgamation, it was because it took into consideration the interests of the depositors, the employers, and the shareholders. So when the LVB was failing, it would definitely not be in a position to pay back to its depositors and also take care of its own employees and the interest of the shareholders. That is where the RBI steps in, which is a regulator of the scheduled commercial banks, and by taking into consideration that the interest of the depositors, the money that these depositors have deposited in this failing bank, should not go away and people should not be cheated of their money. So by taking into consideration the interest of these depositors, the employees of the banks, and the shareholders in these banks who would have lost a lot if the bank had collapsed and failed. So by taking into consideration, RBI had approved the amalgamation of DBS with the Lakshmi Vilas Bank. Similarly, previously the Yes Bank was again failing. It was just a couple of months before that it happened, where maybe in the month of February or March, where again Yes Bank was failing, and this is where the RBI again stepped in and protected the interest of the depositors. So this also shows, these examples can be used to show the role that the RBI is playing in the banking sector to ensure that the banking sector doesn't collapse, and also how the RBI is playing a role in ensuring that the interests of the depositors are never harmed. So in this whole article is saying that the banking sector is definitely in a lot of stress, and this stress, which the banking sector was already there before, has now increased multiple times because of the prevalence of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the impact of the pandemic has been tremendous on the banking sector, is what Geeta Gopinath, who is in the IMF, says that the impact of COVID-19 on the banking sector is very, very severe. So this has led to a balance sheet stress. So the corporate sectors are now facing their stress in their balance sheet, where they are not able to carry on their activities more profitably, and they have not been able to generate a lot of profit. So because of this, the corporates are not able to pay back the loans to the bank, to the various banks from which they would have gotten the loans. And because of this, the non-performing assets in the banking sector is also increasing. And the second thing that this has led to is a debt stress for the government. So government had to now, because of the COVID, spend a lot of money on the measures to overcome this pandemic. And while spending a lot of money, government definitely will have to borrow if it has to spend more on people's welfare. So government has now come under debt, and the balance sheet of the corporates has now come under stress. So this is because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and this is what Geeta Gopinath has said, who is in the IMF, that the impact of the COVID-19 on the banking sector has been very bad, where the balance sheet of the corporates have stressed out, and also the non-performing assets of the banks have now again mounted, leading to bank collapses or failures. So even the RBI's financial stability report, which comes out annually, has also pointed out the same thing, that the gross non-performing assets in 2020 was 8.5%, but because of the delayed recovery that is happening from the COVID-19 pandemic, by March 2021, this gross non-performing assets could as well mount to 14.7%. So this is a huge for the banking sector, that this is a very high percentage of non-performing asset for the banking sector. This shows the extent of stress that is now prevailing in the banking sector. So this was the whole issue about the banking sector, the recent amalgamation, the Yes Bank failure, the role of RBI, and Geeta Gopinathan's comment upon the impact of COVID on the banking sector, and about the RBI's financial stability report, which is again saying that the NPAs are going to mount in the future because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and also the delayed recovery that is happening from the pandemic. Now we move on to the next topic. This topic is on mental health issues or education, again a part of your GS2 syllabus on health or education. This again is a small example, and this whole article was basically talking about how children also require a lot of psychological support. So this is particularly, these kind of articles started coming after Aishwarya Reddy, belonging to Andhra Pradesh, committed suicide. And she was actually admitted to Lady Shri Ram College, but she could not collect enough, she could not bear the expenses there, and she was about to be thrown out of the college, the hostel, and because of all the pressure that was mounting on her, she committed suicide. So after this, a series of articles started to come which spoke about the importance of psychological support to the children. So this was a similar article, but we will be discussing just this example, which according to me is more relevant. But the rest of the article is just talking about the fact that the children require psychological support because otherwise there is a lot of competition, there is a lot of peer pressure and other things. So because of which they might end up accumulating a lot of mental stress. So to relieve all this and to provide that anchoring to the children where they believe in themselves, they have that confidence and they don't stress out themselves, psychological support to children is extremely important in schools and colleges. So this is an example of EHSAS. So EHSAS is actually a clinic that offers psychological support to the students, and this has been set up in Delhi. So in the university campus itself, this has been set up where till now 23,000 hours of counseling and psychological support has been offered to students here. Not just the student, even the parents, the faculties, everybody, the staff in the university, everybody has been offered 23,000 hours of psychological support and counseling by EHSAS. So this is a very good example which you can mention as a case study and say that similar such psychological support clinics of EHSAS elsewhere will also have to be set up to provide that psychological support to students. So that is it about this article. We move on to the next one. This is the last topic, which is about the role of exports. Again, this is a part of your GS3 syllabus. So firstly, the article starts with very important data that you should always use in your answers, that is related to exports and how much exports India is doing and what is the potential. So this data says that in 2017, the overall world exports stood at $18 trillion. Out of this $18 trillion, India's export occupied just 1.7% of this whole $18 trillion worth of exports that happened at the world level. So this shows that India's exports is actually very, very insignificant when we compare it to the overall exports that are happening at the world level. Now, the second important observation is now compare India's percentage of exports with the total world exports with that of China. So China's overall exports contributed nearly 12.8% of this overall exports that happened, the value of exports that happened. So India's share was just 1.7%, while China's share was 12.8%, which is very, very huge compared to India. And India's share is very insignificant. So this is an important data that you will have to mention in your answers on exports. Also, you can see how I have used a pie chart here and I have represented India's share and China's share differently. So such kind of representation can also be used in your answers to enhance the value and the readability of your answers. So this article is quoting the recent book that has been published, that has been released, and it has been written by Arvind Panagaria. So Arvind Panagaria's book name is titled India Unlimited, Reclaiming the Lost Glory. So this book of Arvind Panagaria is talking about the importance of exports in the current world and what is India's potential in it. That is, yes, India's contribution at the international level in terms of exports is very insignificant, but however, India has a lot of potential to increase its share of the international exports. This is what Arvind Panagaria is talking about in this book titled India Unlimited, Reclaiming Lost Glory. So let's see what is India's potential in this regard. The first is that there are several labor intensive tasks that will have to be done by labor, and no machine or no automation can actually replace that. So he gives the example of Adidas. So Adidas is actually producing 360 million pair of shoes every year. But out of this, just 1 million pair of shoes is only done through automation, and the rest of the other pairs are done through human labor itself. So this shows that no matter how much automation or improvements in the technology, breakthrough technologies that come about, there is always going to be a significant portion of the job which will have to be done by the manual labor, and India has plenty of labor available. So it is India is one country wherein these kind of labor intensive tasks can be carried out. All such businesses and industries can be there in India, and they can contribute to India's exports. The second is about the real wages. Now the real wages in China are rising. So this makes India a very good destination for various manufacturing companies to house their base in India, because cheap labor in India is its biggest advantage. When the labor is cheap, the cost of production per unit is going to be less, and that is going to make our exports very competitive at the global level. So we have to take advantage of the rising wage levels in China, because our wage levels still remain very low. So because of our cheap labor and cheap wages, we can attract a lot of industries and manufacturing in India, and that can be exported to the global market. The third is the potential of India, where we can create large firms which are more competitive at the global level. So as far as this is concerned, the article explains this fact with the help of a lot of data. Now let's try to understand this data. It says that 60% of the workforce in India is engaged in firms which employ less than 5 workers. So which means most of the firms in India are very micro and small enterprises which employ less than 5 workers. So 60% of the workforce is engaged in these kind of firms which employ less than 5 workers. And also 75% of the firms in India employ less than 50 workers. So this shows that the size of each firm in India is very, very small. So this makes the productivity also very low. They cannot enjoy the benefits of the advantages of economies of scale, because of which the cost of production per unit would be high, and definitely they would be uncompetitive at the international level. So apart from this, important data that this article quotes, which is a comparison of India and China. It says that 92% of workers in the apparel sector in India, 92% of the workers, they work in firms which employ less than 50 workers. Again, this shows that in the apparel sector also the firms are very, very small in size. But 57% of workers in China, they work in firms which employ more than 200 workers. Now we can just have a comparison of a firm that is just 20 workers, which is a small one, and a firm that is 200 workers, which is a big one. So definitely the firm with the 200 workers is going to be more competitive, it is going to be more aggressive, and it is going to be more competitive at the global level. Its cost of production will be less. It is going to take advantage of the economies of scale. So this is what is happening, that here 20 is India and 200 is China. So the Chinese firms are much bigger compared to the Indian firms, which makes the Chinese firms more competitive and aggressive at the international level. But the small firms in India will have to struggle to get there, but these big Chinese firms can easily get there, because that is the volume of manufacturing that each of the big Chinese firms can undertake, and also are more competitive. So this is an example of comparison of India and China, and this shows that India will have to go from having these extremely small and micro firms in various sectors to having large firms which can be more competitive at the global level. That is only when we can be exporting more to the international market. And why is it important for us to export more? Because more the exports, more is also the GDP. In fact, between 2002 and 2010, when the economy grew at about 8% or 9%, the exports in India grew at 18%. So this was the huge growth that happened in the exports, and it is said that we could grow between this 2002 and 2010, we could grow at more than 8%, and the reason for that is because one of the main reasons for that is because our exports grew a lot at 18% in this time. So this is about the importance of the role of exports, about Arvind Panagaria's book. You can quote the name of the book when you're talking about the importance of exports, and the data, which is very important to show how where the potential lies for India and what it has to do in the future. So that's it for today. These were the other articles that are important or about which we have already discussed. So today we have discussed newspapers of Thursday and Friday, and tomorrow, let me see, maybe I'll do Saturdays or Monday, and Saturday or Monday, or maybe on Tuesday we will discuss Saturdays and Mondays newspaper. So that's it for today. Thank you.